What's going on? Welcome aboard to another episode of the Q&A series. So I hope everybody's doing well. Hope you had a productive week and you're getting one step closer to your goals. I know for myself, this week was very loaded, hence why I'm posting this video 1 or 2 days later, but still get it done nonetheless. And on a little side note, I was listening to this great audiobook that you guys are going to get a lot of value from called The One Thing by Gary Keller, where he talks about, mindset and just organizing yourself in a way where you could get more done, which sounds counterintuitive because they talk about subtracting things, but just focusing on one thing at a time. So you could have, for example, quote unquote, a million things to do, but whatever you're doing at the moment, that's the one thing you're focusing on. And it's okay to set a couple different goals, but ideally you want to narrow it out more, and you could just get the rest of it from that book, which is definitely a must read or a must listen. So today's episode of the Q&A, we got some great questions and we're just going to jump into them. So first things first, we got Jess Peters, who wants to know, "Hi Phil, love your content, man. Lately I've been focusing on building my posterior chain, but my gym doesn't have reverse hyper machines / hyperextension, glute ham raise, etc. I only do RDLs, remaining deadlifts, good mornings, and sometimes cable pull-throughs as accessories to my squat and deadlift. What are some good exercise variations to include into my routine? Also, any reverse hyper alternatives? Thanks." So for the reverse hyper alternatives, Alpha Destiny actually has a great video on that where you could just do it yourself, and that's pretty much the closest thing you'll get to a legitimate reverse hyper alternative. And as far as this question, it depends on your strength levels. It depends on if you have sticking points. I think that if you're at a certain strength level where you're not overly strong, then you're pretty much just weak at the whole lift. But over time, certain sticking points will develop, and then you have to start being more specific with your exercise selection. So for example, you might specialize, or should I say go through a certain cycle where you'll specialize in certain exercises to bring up certain weak points, but that's a lot later on in the lifting journey. But from the list of exercises you're telling me, if I look at these and I'm looking at it from more of a variability and a longevity standpoint, I would say you're probably missing some single leg posterior chain work. So I would definitely recommend a single leg RDL. If you don't want to turn it to a circus act, you could do, for example, a split stand style where you have the back foot in the back of your heel that's in the front. And so you have 80% of your weight on that front foot, and the other leg is just there for stability. And you can really load one at a time. And this will help from the longevity aspect. It'll help address certain strength imbalances. And that's what I would personally recommend, a single leg RDL. But once again, it all depends on context. Depends where you are on the lifting journey, how strong are you, do you have any injuries? All these factors come into play. But I would definitely add in and definitely sprinkle in more unilateral work for assistance and accessories. So Marcus Balzer wants to know, what do you think of the trap bar high pull instead of the snatch grip high pull? So you're probably referring to the exercise that I mentioned back in the day in my trap bar video, which is actually my highest viewed video, by the way, which is funny because I wasn't really expecting much from it, but that was during a phase where I was really experimenting with different high pull variations. And if there's anybody who's tried a lot of high pull variations, it's me, from dumbbells to trap bars, specialty bars, everything. And I've really found overall that the snatch grip high pull is the superior variation if we're talking about trap growth. And yeah, you have the neutral grip hand component, but most trap bars are pretty narrow, so it doesn't lend itself too well to being the best trap builder, at least in my humble opinion. Some of the functions of the traps, for example, scapular elevation, there's upward rotation, you still get some of that to a certain extent with the trap bar high pull, but it's just way more pronounced. The catch is more pronounced. Just the hand position, elbow position, just the grip width, it puts you in such a great situation to catch heavy weights. And I would personally just recommend doing it with the snatch grip. But if you're feeling adventurous and you want to just try it out, give it a shot. Do it for a whole cycle. For example, you could even, this is what you could do, and I'm not even just talking about trap training. I'm talking about any muscle, from the neck to your calves to your forearms to your delts, whatever the case is. Simply run a certain program for, let's say, roughly 8 weeks. And before that 8-week program starts, wake up in the morning, completely fast, and just take all your measurements. You could get your measurements, for example, have one section where flex measurements, then have another section where it's relaxed. Do, for example, that snatch grip or the trap bar high pull. Do it for 8 weeks. You can do it once to twice a week. And let's see if you maintain the same weight if you report with any significant growth. And then, for example, you could try, let's say you don't get any, or you get very little, try the snatch grip high pull. And I guarantee you'll most likely get a bit more. But that's kind of the point I'm trying to get to, is that feel free to experiment with certain exercises for yourself, but you still have to have some kind of baseline to see, okay, is this really hypertrophying the traps? Or maybe you don't really care about hypertrophy and you just want to get a certain amount of strength on certain exercises, then be my guest. So Innovation 99 wants to know, hey bro, I've been training for 2 years now and my curl strength sucks. What can I do? I know that the best alternative would be to do them at the beginning of my workout, but if I do so, I won't be able to lift too much weight on my following exercises, compounds. So you basically want to get a stronger curl, which you didn't specify which one it was. It could be a hammer curl, seated curl, strict curl, standing barbell curl. You just want to have a stronger curl, but you don't want it to affect your compound lifts. Well, whatever you do in a fresh state is going to have more priority. So some kind of strength has to give. So in that case, if you don't want your compounds to suffer, the most logical solution would be to have its own day for arms. So for example, let's say you're running, hypothetically speaking, like an upper lower routine. You can have upper body day, lower body day, like lower intensity, upper intensity, and then later on in the week you could have upper volume, lower volume, and then maybe the 5th day of the week you could have like an arm day, or you could have like a curling day. That way you could start off with the curls and it'll have more of your attention. That's just one way to do it. But honestly, just thinking back now, one other way that I would actually recommend, as opposed to having its own day, which is still a decent option, but you could also just have your heavier curl on your upper body intensity day. So you could do all your compounds, and I would recommend you do the compounds before the curl. It just makes more sense. I don't really recommend doing a heavy curl and then going into heavy rows. It makes more sense to just do the rows first and the pull-ups first. But it depends on how much of a priority this curl is. If you're, for example, training for like a strict curl competition, then the curl is going to be more of a priority in the routine. So you didn't say like how urgent it really was, you know? So I know I'm all over the place with this, but the two options are, you could have your own day where you specialize in that lift and you start off with that lift and you do like higher percentages, and then you maybe do some back down sets, maybe throw in some arm work. Or you could have more of the intensity volume style, where on your intensity day, maybe you bench, you do like some weighted pull-ups, got some rows in there, do some dumbbell bench, whatever. And then you could finish off with like a heavy curl. And then on your volume day, you could do some volume curls. So that's another way you could go about it. And those are hands down my two best options. So Gravity Training says, a channel I follow says that box squats are trash for hypertrophy, but box front squats are really good. Would these be a good alternative as an extra squat variation? I also high bar pause squat and do single leg work, hip hinge, etc. So I'm personally curious to know what the channel was that said that box squats are not good for hypertrophy and why the box front squat is superior. And at the end of the day, it all depends on context. No exercise is necessarily better than the other. It depends on the context of, you know, the client, what the goals are, injury history, what his current strength levels are, and things of that nature. So you didn't really specify like how strong you were, and that's going to be a big dictator of what kind of lifts you should have in your rotation and what lifts you shouldn't have. But I think they might be saying that the front squat, or should I say the box squat, may not be that good for hypertrophy, because a lot of people who do box squats, especially like in the equipped world, they'll use, you know, a very low bar placement on the upper back. They'll have a really wide stance, and they're really cutting out inches of range of motion because they're trying to move the most amount of weight possible. And I guess that from a hypertrophy standpoint, we don't want to be doing this. We want to get more range of motion, we want to get fuller stretch in the muscle, all that kind of good stuff, more active range of motion, mechanical tension, and that's probably where he was getting at with that comment. But the box front squat, as far as that lift, I don't see it being performed too much, but it could be a good tool in the toolbox for let's say, an individual who wants to go deeper on a consistent basis. On every rep of the front squat, they want to reach the same amount of depth. The box could be a good tool as a reference, because they know that on every rep, their glutes are going to touch it. But like I mentioned, for example, for you, it depends on how strong you are. That's going to dictate what kind of exercise you have in there. But I would recommend, for example, you already said you're doing some single leg work. You already said you're doing some pause work. You could have some tempo work in there. You could have some safety bar squats. I like those a lot. I made a whole video on safety bars, the benefits from the reaching and the posterior rib cage expansion, all that good stuff. So if you have access to safety bar squat, that's definitely a good one to have in your rotation. So Grand Poobah wants to know, is there anything you could do exercise-wise to prevent or get rid of elbow pain? I usually get elbow pain after overhead tricep extensions, example French presses with tricep bar. From what I've personally observed over the years is that people get elbow pain from a lot of tricep work done way too heavy. You don't have to go as heavy as you think on tricep extensions. That's what, chain dips, close grip benching, that's what those lifts are for. So you can really overload the triceps. And I think it was Josh Bryan who said that when you're doing isolation lifts, it's just a contraction with weight in your hand. So for example, just take no weight, just close your fist and just lock out your tricep. And the way you feel it is how you should be feeling it when you're doing your isolation work. You shouldn't be straining yourself too much. These aren't like competitions to see how much you could tricep extend. And I've actually made a couple of videos as well talking about tempo work, pause work. If you want to have more longevity in the iron game with your elbows, simply do tempo work on your tricep exercises. It's so simple. So for example, if you're doing like an easy bar, if you're doing like, let's say some dumbbells with a neutral grip on your tricep extensions, and you feel like you're starting to get some elbow pain, simply do a slower tempo. You could do, for example, 3 seconds down, 3-second pause, and then you come up. Then you up the reps, lower the rest periods. Use certain things like that. Do them at the end of the workout where you're really pre-exhausted. When you use certain strategies like this, you won't need as much weight to get the job done. You could also do, for example, band push downs, or you can even add bands and chains. That's a whole other world altogether. If you do your skull crushers with chains, that's gonna make it alleviate some of that tension at the bottom where you just get more at the top, so you can still apply progressive overload. But there's definitely a lot of things you could do. You could also incorporate neutral grip lifts. I personally find they have more of a better alignment from the wrist, elbow, and the shoulder, and a lot of people get less elbow pain from that as well. So it's a combination of everything I just said, and you do these at the end of the workout and you should have a lot less problems. Adrian Molina wants to know, hey Phil, what are the best exercises to really hit and strengthen your VMO? There's not a lot of talk about it anywhere, and if there is, it's mostly on rehabilitation for the knees. Keep up the good work. So whenever you were talking about any kind of muscle group, it could be the VMO, it could be the traps, whatever the case is, look at the function of that muscle, and that's already going to tell you a lot movement-wise of what kind of exercise you should be doing. So the function of the VMO is knee extension. So this would be on something like a leg extension machine. I know it's like not the funnest answer, it's kind of boring, but knee extension, or should I say a leg extension machine, will hit the VMO quite well if we're talking about just hitting that muscle. But my question back to you is, how much time do you really have in your hands? Because a lot of people don't have time to be doing leg extensions. If you have, for example, an hour and a half in the gym, I'm not going to be putting someone on the leg extension machine when they could be getting more bang for your buck movements. They'll still hit the VMO to a certain extent, like for example, some single leg work where you really get a lot of knee flexion, the knees really travel forward and you lock out at the top. And also you're going to get more athletic benefits, proprioception in the lower body, stuff of that nature. So if you have time to do it, and if you're really dead serious about building your VMO and you really want to isolate it, then sure, you could do, for example, some leg extensions. But just know that other squatting variations, leg presses and hack squats are still going to hit the VMO to a certain extent as well. So if you really want to get nerdy about it and you really want to get to the exact function of it, then you could do that. But if not, you could also go the other route where you do a lot of unilateral work, squatting variations, and hacks and stuff of that nature. So Flex and Riffs wants to know, gym's a long drive and tough to get to with work schedule. Would a 2-day full body 5x5 type program plus 1 day at home accessories cardio be sufficient volume? Now, with a question like this, my question back to you is, what's the objective? A lot of you guys send questions and they're very dry. Like, should I train 3 days a week? What's the objective? For example, the more serious the goal is, the more days in the gym I would probably recommend. I would recommend for someone have 4 days in the gym as opposed to being in the gym twice a week if they're trying to get as big and strong as possible. So my personal recommendation for you would be to actually just invest in some kind of equipment so that way you don't have to take that long drive with your work schedule. You're just gonna have your equipment at home. So, just save up like $1,000 and, you know, buy like a rack. You could buy some plates. You could buy them secondhand. You can even make your own rack, you know, do it yourself style. People make it with wood. It doesn't have to be really fancy, you know. It's not like you're not trying to make a commercial here, you know, you're just trying to train. It doesn't even have to look that presentable. You're just trying to lift some weight, and it doesn't even have to take up that much room either. There's even certain racks where they go into the wall and they come out, so which might be more expensive, but I would personally recommend that if your work schedule is really interfering with your training, just bring the training closer to you so you don't have to go to the training. You just go to work, you come back, you train, and that's it. It'll make your life 10 times easier. I can't even imagine me having to go to the gym now. Not that I could anyways, because, you know, they're closed, but when you have a gym where you are, it just makes it a lot easier for you. And you don't have to go all out. You know, I should make a series on this, or I should make like an episode. You could get like an adjustable dumbbell set, and you're gonna have all your dumbbells there. It doesn't take up much room. You know, put your equipment on the wall, so it doesn't take up much room. You know, you start off with a basic barbell, make your own rack, or just buy a cheap one. You know, you get on like Marketplace, stuff like that. And this is not only gonna save you a lot of money, but it's gonna save you a lot of time as well. And it's actually pretty fun. You know, you're collecting different stuff. You know, when you don't want it anymore, you could just sell it for probably just as much money. And that's just my 2 cents. But just to complete the rest of that, I would recommend you train, you know, 3 or 4 days a week as opposed to 2 days per week where you have to go all the way to the gym. It's just way more feasible. It just sounds like more of a better lifestyle change for the position that you're in. So I hope that helps. Gravity Training says, great video. I'm trying to get my ring dips up. Do you have any experience with them? Currently train the RTO hold for time and German hang twice a week. Not doing dips until I get these good. I have other pushing variations. Help. So I've tried rings for a fair amount of time, maybe in like 2015, and I was doing the ring dips, the ring pull-ups, ring push-ups, a lot of different ring work just for experimentation purposes, and really good, you know, chest activation. There's a lot of stability involved, but I would recommend starting off with the ring push-ups, getting stronger at those, and then you could do, for example, ring iso holds on your dips with a combination of assisted ring dips. So the assisted ring dips is like, could be done with bands. So you can have band assistance, just like how you do have your band assistance for pull-ups. And this will help you get more reps in. But if you want to have even more of a regression, just get stronger at the ring push-ups. And then you could, once you have more of the stability aspect down, because it will feel very wobbly if you're not used to ring training, then you could start doing the assisted ring dips, ring iso holds, and stuff of that nature. And you do, the progression is using thinner bands as the weeks go on until eventually you're not using any bands at all, and then you're doing reps all by yourself. Jaquim Garcia says, hey Phil, doing rack pull is great for back, but is it too for glutes and hamstrings, or unconventional like behind the back deadlift and Jefferson are better in a hypertrophy perspective? Thanks. Okay, so what you're basically asking is, the rack pull, does it also work the glutes and hamstrings? So that's the first question. So I would say it does, but it's definitely not maximized. So when we're talking about the glutes and hamstrings, especially the hamstrings, if you want to have a good amount of degree of hip flexion and then extension, so basically exercises where you're really hinging back, but it depends on what set height is the rack pull. So are we talking about a rack pull where it's 1 inch off the ground? Is it at mid shin? Is it below the knee? Is it above the knee? You didn't specify how high the rack pull is. People say the word rack pull so loosely, but you have to also specify where the rack is. There's a really big difference between a rack pull done where the rack is set where it's 1 inch off the ground with the plates compared to right above the knee. These are two completely different lifts altogether. They're going to give you two completely different ranges of motion, but you're definitely right about a rack pull will hit the back very hard, that's for sure. But as far as the glutes and hamstring are concerned, there's better movements for that than the rack pull. There's like hinges and there's other functions of the glutes and hamstrings that they don't get maximized when you're doing like a rack pull, especially the one that you're mentioning. As far as the other lifts you're talking about, behind the back deadlift, that's a bit more of like, the closest thing to that would be like a hack squat. So it's very like quaddy, but also works a lot of like mid back, upper back as well in isometric fashion. So it works a lot of quads. Then the Jefferson pull, this is a lot for Still works quads to a great extent, but it also brings in more adductors and obliques into the mix as well. So as far as your program is concerned, you have to plug and play at the right times and see with your goals what's appropriate to plug at the right time. Jared Tedesco wants to know, hey Phil, what's your opinion on the chest supported row machine, the machine where you're at the same angle as the row you are demonstrating? You can load it with plates, and personally I've seen some good results from using it, increased back strength, able to progressively overload the movement. So you're basically talking about like a 45-degree angle row machine, and I'm assuming that you're also talking about the T-bar, so the chest supported T-bar row. So this is hands down my favorite machine for back training. I know people are against machines and whatnot, but I'm really a huge advocate of this machine. I actually tried in the past to have a do-it-yourself version, which it was okay, but I actually just used the freestanding version. And in the video, the closest thing I'll ever get to a chest supported row to that machine is the video I post on Instagram on the mechanical drop sets, where I'll set up my bench to roughly a 45-degree angle, put like a cinder block under, and I'll use dumbbells. And I like the dumbbells as well, on a little side note, because when you use a barbell, it's gonna hit the bench way sooner, whereas the dumbbells, they kind of help you go around it. It's kind of like a cambered bar, and you could do like a neutral grip with the elbows really close to the body, really bias more lats, and you could do a wider grip with the elbows more out to bias more of the upper back, rhomboid, stuff of that nature. But to answer your question of what's my thoughts on the machine, I think it's amazing. And if you don't have access to this machine, you can still have a do-it-yourself version in your garage gym or even your commercial gym, because some commercial gyms don't have it either. I'd be surprised if they don't, but if they don't, simply go on like a box where they do box jumps, put a bench over it, and then you can just get to work. But that pretty much wraps it up. Those are the questions for this Q&A episode. So let me know what the new questions are for the next episode on the 14th of June. And with that being said, I hope you guys have a good week, and I'll see you guys very soon.